Hey, what's up everybody? It's Rutech. Today, we're talking about the best $1,200 AMD gaming PC for December of 2020. So in this video, I'm talking about my personal recommendation as the best $450 gaming PC, but perhaps you have a different smaller or bigger budget, or you're just looking for something with different specific features and want a more personalized recommendation from a highly trustworthy source. Well, there's this new shopping tool called Lustre. It's a free Chrome extension that gives you exactly that. Not only does it find and analyze trusted expert reviews, but it also brings up discussion forums mentioning products like on Reddit or video reviews on YouTube. This makes it quick and easy to get a second opinion as you're shopping right on Amazon. It even provides personalized product recommendations for your exact budget with price comparisons across different retailers like Best Buy, Walmart, Amazon, etc., so that you can always get the lowest price. The whole point is you're going to be saving a lot of time and cash using Lustre. Link for the free Chrome extension is in my description. And just at first glance, you can definitely tell that this is quite the powerhouse of a PC, and that power supply totally isn't edited into the frame. But yeah, let's get started by unboxing our Seasonic 650 watt 80 plus gold certified power supply. There's a ton of stuff included with the box, but the main thing we really want to focus on is the power supply itself. This is semi-modular, meaning that you can attach or detach specific power cables based on what PC parts you're using. But yeah, Seasonic did make sure to include a ton of stuff in the box. You'll have exactly what you need for both cable management and, of course, powering the computer. Now let's prepare the power supply for installation. You'll of course want to undo the strap holding all the power cables because we'll be using them. And the only power cable we'll have to connect is the Molex power connector. The Molex connector is used to power the RGB light on our CPU cooler. And now it's time to place the power supply, in our case, the Corsair 4000D. Now you want to make sure that the fan is facing the bottom of the case. Super easy to slide in. Literally all you have to do is just push it into position, and then you secure it in place using the screws that are included with the Seasonic power supply. And there should be a total of 4 screws, 1 on each corner. And now this might be a little confusing to you guys, but don't worry, I'll explain. You want to ensure your power supply is switched off and plug it into the wall. This will allow you to easily eliminate static discharge by touching any metal part of the case. Now, if you release that static discharge into a PC part, you run the risk of either damaging or completely killing it. So please take this extra step. It could potentially save you hundreds of dollars worth of damage. Moving on, we have the motherboard, which is the funnest part in my opinion. In the box alongside the motherboard, you'll find some SATA cables, the IO shield, a bunch of instructions, a disk that you will not need if you have internet access, and of course the M.2 screw. You want to make sure you do not lose this because you need it for the installation of the M.2 storage. So the first thing that we want to install on the motherboard is our Ryzen 5 3600 XT. Now you really don't have to use the 3600 XT in specific. You could definitely use the 3600 or 3600X. These 3 processors are extremely similar in performance, so I will have all 3 listed in the description. You really should just choose the one that is priced the absolute best at the time of your purchase. The one I chose though, the 3600 XT, is the strongest of the 3. And to install it, you lift the lever of the CPU socket, carefully remove your Ryzen 5 processor from its plastic casing, and only hold the processor by its sides. You don't want to touch the pins on the bottom. That could damage the processor. Now locate the triangle on the bottom left of the Ryzen processor and match it up with the marking on the corner of the CPU socket. Be very slow and careful. Make sure that the CPU is aligned with the socket, then lower the lever and lock it in place. I know that for a lot of you, this is the scariest step. You seriously don't need to have surgeon's hands to do this. Just take your time, don't rush, and you will not fail. With the CPU installed, it's time to put in the RAM. Since we're only using 2 sticks of RAM, it's very important that we only use DIMM slot A2 and B2. They actually have a little guide on the motherboard that tells you which RAM sticks to install first. So now that we know which DIMM slots to be using, push down on the RAM retention clips to prepare them for the installation of our memory, the G.Skill Ripjaw 5 16GB of 3600 MHz RAM. The Ripjaw 5 series RAM contains the perfect combination of both performance and aesthetics without any flashy RGB. It only goes in one way, so not to worry, you won't be putting it in backwards. And to secure it in place, use both your thumbs until you hear a click coming from both sides. No excessive force is needed, just wait until you hear that satisfying click. Now for the installation of our storage, the 1TB M2 NVMe solid state drive from Crucial. 1TB is more than enough for most game libraries, but if you need more, you totally can upgrade down the road. To secure our M2 drive, you'll need the M2 screw that came with the motherboard box. The only thing you really need to do to prepare the motherboard for the installation of the M2 is to relocate the M2 standoff screw to the second to the left screw hole. Then you can slide your M2 drive into place. It's very easy to put in. And to fasten it in place, use that M2 screw I was talking about a couple seconds ago. And that's seriously all it takes to install our only storage drive for this build. And this is why I love M2 drives. Installing them takes almost no time at all. And the last part we want to install onto the motherboard before we put it into the case, the CPU cooler. The abundance of wires, screws, and brackets may confuse you at first, but don't worry, I laid out here all the items you need for the installation of the CPU cooler with this specific PC build. So let's start with the bracket. Insert the long-ish screws into the AM4 screw holes, and then secure them in place using the black washers. Then you can loosely set it under the motherboard. Don't worry, it's supposed to be loose in there. We'll be securing it and tightening it in the next few steps. Now take 4 more of those washers we just used earlier and push them down onto the tall screws. Then take the 4 hex coupling nuts and screw them in right on top of those washers. At this point, only loosely screw them in because the real tightening comes when we use the included wrench. Be sure not to go too crazy with tightening these hex nuts. You don't want to accidentally break your motherboard. You can totally use the thermal paste that is included with the CPU cooler. I decided to go ahead and use my own. I'm using Arctic Silver 5. I used a tiny bit too much thermal compound, but it's not a big deal. It really won't cause any problems. It is overall recommended that you only use a pea-sized amount of thermal paste. Anyway, at this point, you'll want to place your CPU cooler heatsink directly onto the CPU. You don't need to apply any pressure, just get it on top of the CPU for the time being. Now you can set in the brackets and you want to ensure that they're in contact with the CPU cooler, as you can see right here. They're level because they're sitting on top of the cooler. Now that we have everything in place, it's time to start screwing in the CPU cooler. You do this by using the 4 included spring screws, and you want to do it in an X pattern. So first screw in the top left, then the bottom right, then the top right and bottom left, and keep alternating until all the screws are nice and tight. If you don't do it in an X pattern, your thermal paste will not be evenly spread, which could definitely lead to some thermal problems, so I highly recommend that you install them in the X pattern until all the screws are nice and tight. Lastly, of course, we need to attach the 120mm fan. I decided to go with Scythe's 120mm RGB fan instead of the RGB fan included in the CPU cooler box, purely for aesthetic consistency reasons, I guess you could say. I just want all the fans in the build to match. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with using the fan that is included with the CPU cooler. And as for powering the CPU fan, all you need to do is locate the 4-pin connector that comes out of the Scythe fan and plug it into the header on the motherboard labeled CPU fan. So now let's install a couple things in our case, starting with the I/O shield. It's included with the motherboard, and to install it, it's as easy as applying pressure around the corners until it snaps in place. Now let's get all these stock 120mm fans removed, starting with the rear case fan. Now these stock fans are perfectly fine. I'm just removing them because we're using the Scythe K's Flex RGB fans for this PC build. To remove the front panels, Corsair makes it really easy. It snaps right out of place. Same with the dust filter, you can just use your hands to remove it. And then you can unscrew the 120mm Corsair stock fan. And now we can finally install our motherboard. The best way to do this is to use the I/O shield as an alignment guide. If the I/O lines up with the I/O shield, you did it right. Now let's start plugging everything in, starting with the CPU power cable. This plugs into the very top left power socket on the motherboard. Next up, the biggest power connector, the 24-pin. This plugs into the right middle-ish area of the motherboard and may take a little bit of time to get pushed in all the way. If there's no visible gap between the connector and the socket, then you have properly installed it. And now for the front I/O, starting with the HD audio connector. This goes on the very bottom left corner of the motherboard. Next up, the USB 3.0 connector. You can find the header for it towards the bottom right of the motherboard. And now for the trickiest cables, the front panel connectors. Seriously, the best way to plug these in is to just use the instructions. As you can see here on the instructions, it tells you where exactly each individual cable goes. And now for the part you've probably been waiting for, the graphics card, the RX 5700 XT, and the one in specific that we're using for this build is XFX's 3-fan 5700 XT with 8GB of VRAM. The packaging is pretty basic, just a cardboard box and a black bubble wrap bag, but that really doesn't matter because this is seriously a super strong and capable graphics card. And yes, it is a pretty big, long card, but that's okay, it fits just fine in our case. You of course don't want to forget to remove the plastic wrapping on the graphics card. Now let's get everything ready so we can actually put the graphics card in the PC, starting with the PCIe brackets. You'll want to remove the second and third to the top screws, which frees up the brackets and allows you to remove them. Next, push down on the PCIe retention clip, and it's finally time to install the graphics card. You'll know that you properly installed the graphics card if the retention clip snaps back into place. Then, while giving the graphics card a little bit of support with your hand, screw it in place using the screws that we removed earlier with the PCIe brackets. And of course, we need to supply the graphics card with a good bit of power, so go ahead and locate the two 6+2 power connectors, plug them right on into the 5700 XT. And finally, we of course have to utilize the airflow function of this Corsair 4000D case. So for the fans, I chose out the Scythe K's Flex RGB fans. These fans perform phenomenally, and their RGB LEDs are very nice and bright. For this build, we're using 5 120mm fans and 2 140mm fans. Each individual fan comes with its own screws, so let's get right into it, starting with the rear 120mm fan. To power this thing, it's best to plug its 4-pin power connector on the system fan header towards the middle left of the motherboard. For top exhaust, we're using the 140mm Scythe K's Flex fans. Same exact process, you just use the 4 screws that are included with the fan. For the 140mm fan on the left, you want to plug its 4-pin power connector to the system fan 3 header. Then you can go right ahead and install the right 140mm exhaust fan. As for the power connector, the wire is a little short, so you want to make sure that the cable is sticking out towards the back of the case from the fan so that it can reach the system fan 4 header on the motherboard. And now for the front 3 intake 120mm fans. To power these fans, we're going to connect all 3 of them to a fan hub. And the reason for this is simple, the B450 Tomahawk Max doesn't really have 6 system fan headers. Anyway, this is what it should look like when all 3 of the 120mm fans are installed. And like I said earlier, we're going to be using a fan hub to power these fans. It's best to plug this fan hub into the bottom left system fan 2 header. Then you can take all 3 of the 4-pin connectors from the front intake fans and connect them to the fan hub. And if you're wondering, this fan hub doesn't divide the power to the fans per se. The fans will still get the same amount of voltage as if they're directly plugged into the motherboard. The best place to put the fan hub is right in front of the hard drive bracket. And now for the RGB connectors. So how you plug in the RGB connectors is pretty simple, but a little difficult to explain. With the Scythe K's RGB Flex fans, you're able to daisy chain all the RGB connectors together, meaning that you only have to use one RGB header to sync up all of the fans' colors. So in short, connect one female RGB connector to the motherboard and daisy chain it to the rest of the fans' RGB connectors. I attempted to make a nice little diagram to make it a bit easier to understand, but I think you guys will understand it once you have the fans and their connectors in hand. And yeah, that's the last step for the PC build guide. So enjoy this clip of me doing my absolute best to tear the plastic wrapping off of the tempered glass side panel. Although it was a bit of a struggle, it's still super satisfying and I wanted to share this clip with you guys. So that's all for the hardware side of things. Now let's talk about software. The first step is to get a USB drive that is at least 8 GB in storage. Plug that into a separate Windows device, and then head over to Microsoft's website where you can install a Windows 10 ISO file. Now I will have the link to this in the description. When you arrive at this website, click Download Tool Now. The download definitely won't take too long, so once it's downloaded, be sure to click and drag it to a desktop or somewhere where it's easily accessible. You can then double click the file and click yes if it asks to make changes to your computer. Then it'll take a couple seconds to load, get things ready as it says. And then you'll want to click accept. It'll then load a little bit more. And make sure you have Create Installation Media selected and click Next. Usually the recommended items are correct, but be sure to verify that they are anyway, and then click Next. Then make sure you have USB flash drive selected and click Next. Make sure it has your USB drive selected for the installation media, and then you can click next. And once it says your USB flash drive is finished, you can remove it from your computer and move on to the next step. So now with Windows on your USB drive, you're ready to plug it into the PC and boot it up. The computer will take a couple of seconds to load up before you're greeted by the Windows installation prompt. Once this screen comes up, verify that all the information is correct, language, time, keyboard, etc., and click Next. Then click Install Now. It'll do a little bit more of loading. Then you want to go to the bottom and click I don't have a product key. You'll be able to put this key in later on. Click either Windows 10 Home or Windows 10 Pro, and then click Next. Brush up on your Microsoft software license terms, and then click I accept the license terms if you accept them, and click Next. Then click the bottom option, Custom Install. You want to install Windows onto the 930.9-ish gigabyte drive. For you guys, only one drive should show up, but since I already have Windows installed onto this PC and have been using it for a good bit, it's showing up with 4. So go ahead and click Next, and Windows should start installing. Once Windows installs, it's a good idea to go and activate XMP. To do this, all you need to do is boot your computer, spam the delete key until you're greeted by the BIOS, and right on the front screen you should see a button that allows you to activate XMP. Click it once and then save and exit. Now head over to digitalchillmart.com, the best place to get cheap Windows 10 licenses. This is definitely one of the most trustworthy places to get Windows, as I and many of my followers have been using their service for a very long time. Be sure to use coupon code RUTECH for 10% off of your purchase. Link is in the description. Once you have your Windows code, head over to the search bar at the bottom left and search Activation. Click on Activation Settings, and then you should find a screen like this. You'll want to click Activate and put in the Windows code you got from Digital Chill Mart, and then you'll have a fully registered copy of Windows 10, whether it be Windows 10 Home or Windows 10 Pro. And now for the installation of drivers. So every link to every driver you need for this build will be in the description of the video. I'm not going to go over what buttons you click to install the drivers, as it's pretty straightforward. So yeah, all links will be in the description. And last, but certainly not least, we have the benchmarks for this PC. So for this segment of the video, I will not be doing any commentary. I'll just have some nice, soothing music made by Matry Beats in the background. Enjoy. So that will do it for today's video. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like. Have any comments or questions, be sure to drop a comment below. And if you enjoy the content that you're seeing, drop a sub. Also, if you built this PC or at least plan on building it, drop a comment, let the community know. We'd love to hear about it. Thanks for watching. Peace out.